Involuntary consent. It was a scorching July afternoon, with temperatures soaring to 102 degrees, when 85-year-old Mrs. Harlan made her way out of the grocery store. But as she stepped off the curb, she suddenly felt faint. The world spun, her legs gave out, and she fell heavily to the blazing hot pavement, feeling a sharp pain radiate through her left hip. Moments later, a passerby called 911. When EMTs Sarah and Mike arrived, they found Mrs. Harlan lying on the pavement, her left leg twisted painfully. The EMTs knew the pavement temperature was dangerously high and immediately tried to move closer to help her. "Mrs. Harlan, I'm Sarah, an EMT. We're here to help you. We need to get you out of this heat and to a hospital to take care of your hip." But Mrs. Harlan looked at them with a steady, unwavering gaze. "No, I don't want any help," she said firmly. "I know my hip is broken, and I know what that means. I'm ready to die right here. I've outlived my husband, my children. This is a sign. It's my time." Sarah knelt beside her, feeling the heat radiating up from the pavement, concerned about the risk of heat stroke or severe burns. "Mrs. Harlan, I understand you're in pain and have been through a lot, but lying here is dangerous in this heat. Can we move you to a stretcher and talk in the shade?" "No," she replied. "I've made up my mind. I know that if I don't go to the hospital, I'll die, and I'm at peace with that." She understood everything the EMTs explained about her injury, her current risks, and the potential for complications if untreated. Yet, she remained resolute in her wish to stay where she was. Sarah and Mike exchanged a concerned look. Although Mrs. Harlan was oriented to person, place, time, and event, her insistence on refusing life-saving treatment worried them. Her desire to die here, on the searing asphalt in the middle of a busy parking lot, raised serious concerns about her mental and emotional well-being. They decided they needed additional support. Mike called for law enforcement assistance, requesting an officer to determine if Mrs. Harlan met the criteria for a 5150 hold for her own safety. When Officer Lopez arrived, he spoke gently with Mrs. Harlan, carefully assessing her mental state. She was lucid but despondent, repeatedly saying that her fall was a sign and that she was ready to join her family. After a thorough evaluation and a call to his supervisor, Officer Lopez approved placing Mrs. Harlan on a 5150 hold, authorizing treatment and transport under involuntary consent for her own health and safety. With law enforcement's assistance, Sarah and Mike carefully lifted Mrs. Harlan onto a stretcher, moving her into the cool air of the ambulance. Sarah placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "We're here with you, Mrs. Harlan. You don't have to be alone in this." During the transport, Sarah and Mike completed a full assessment, stabilizing her fractured hip with a splint to prevent further injury and managing her pain as much as possible. At the hospital, Mrs. Harlan's hip was surgically repaired, giving her the chance to regain mobility. But the care didn't stop there. The hospital also connected her with a counselor, offering support and helping her find a path forward amid the grief of outliving her loved ones. The role of involuntary consent and mental health awareness in EMS. This scenario highlights the complex decisions EMS professionals face when a patient may need care but refuses it, especially if they express a desire to die. Mrs. Harlan was alert and aware of her surroundings and the consequences of her refusal, but her readiness to accept death and remain in life-threatening conditions indicated possible emotional distress and a lack of self-preservation. By involving law enforcement, the EMTs followed protocols to ensure Mrs. Harlan's safety. Acting under involuntary consent allowed them to address her immediate physical injuries and offer her mental health support. This case is a reminder that EMS care extends beyond physical injuries, recognizing the profound impact of mental and emotional well-being on patients' lives. It is critically important to realize and understand you are not allowed to treat any patient until you have obtained one of these 4 types of consent.